Is 3:02, so we are actually going to go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Owen Garrett. I'm the Director of Residential Life at Temple University.
And,
go ahead.
And I'm Curtis Dugar, Director for Residential and Dining Services at East Stroudsburg University. Good afternoon, everybody.
It is good to see all of you this afternoon to be part of what is an amazing conference with the fam. Curtis and I wanted to spend a little bit of time. We want to talk about trust here today. And we want to talk a little bit about how this presentation came about. It's not going to be so much a Trust 101 session as much as it is a deep dive conversation with all of you participation about the whole idea of trust. It came up as a result of conversations he and I had been having in the past about how folks perceive trust in this day and age, particularly in an environment right now where there's a whole lot of uncertainty and a whole lot of questions about how things work and ambiguity. And there are breeding ground, those kinds of situations in some ways can be breeding grounds of mistrust. But we also wanted to really think about how do we really build authentic trust? How do we really understand it? How do we really, how does it really manifest in this time? How do we really gain it? And how do we really use it to really create genuine relationships? We're going to talk a little bit about that through the course of this presentation. So our objectives really, there we go. Through our conversation and discussion, we really want to talk a little bit about how we develop that understanding of trust. How do we understand the forms that trust takes within our organizations, within our relationships? And then in turn, how do we identify strategies for really earning, evaluating, gaining trust within our relationships and organizations? As we go through this is set up as a set of kind of prompt questions. We want to encourage you to be really active parts of the conversation. We really want this to be a dialogue about the conversation, so we leave with a more enhanced understanding of how this works.
Just kind of piggybacking off of that, I think what's exciting about this conversation really is we're wanting this to be a very vulnerable, candid experience space for us to exchange and engage. As Olin and I kind of talked about it, we really want to close the door and really create a space where we can actually break down some things and have some honest conversation about this notion of trust. As we navigate our experiences, both professional and personal, we take and embrace and break down and redefine trust in so many different ways. So one of the things that we wanted to do is ensure that this particular session gives us an opportunity to truly shine a light on how we define and work through this concept of trust in the workplace, particularly for this particular conversation. And as we continue to see the trends of higher education continue to shift and to redefine itself. So again, lean into this conversation. We're excited for you all to really be engaged and connected and put yourself out there to learn, but then also to push each other to grow a little bit when we talk about trust. I think the other piece of this is we want the conversations today to really prompt us in regard and prepare us for how we have these tough conversations when we return back. Well, we didn't really leave our campuses, but when we engage our colleagues, how are we thinking about the conversations about trust with folks who we work with, whether it's directly within our respective offices or across campus? Because as we define culture, when it comes to how we collaborate and support each other, it's really tied to this notion of trust. So thinking about how our relationships with our supervisors and senior leadership and all the way down to our student staff, like what does that trust component look like, and how do we continue to assess it in order for us to truly push forward authentic and vibrant relationships?
All right, let's go.
So the miseducation of Olin and I, we really had a ball with this title because we had some flashbacks, just to be very honest. So many of you all, when you think about miseducation, probably from our collegiate days, more than likely, we remember when Lauryn Hill came out with the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Still one of my top 10 albums of all time. But one of the things that came to mind was this concept of miseducation is a very direct one that's steeped in history, right? And one of the things that we talked about very quickly was the fact that, you know, the miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson is a very classic novel that I encourage folks to read, that talks about over the course of history, the miseducation, the misguidance, the social construct of how how the Negro was educated to function within society, plays a lot into, again, this notion of how we kind of understand trust, right? And how trust was built up in a way to continue to see systems progress, right? But then again, Lauryn Hill and her whole catalog, you know, was another way that we tied into this miseducation piece, because here it was, we saw this woman, phenomenal, talented artist, really tell us her story and how she had to relearn a lot of things about life, about how to be a strong woman, how to be an artist, how to be, you know, an activist, all these type of things in this one album. So we learned a lot about who she was, but then also the environment around her through this act of artistry, right? But then, you know, and I was joking with Olin, I found, and I unfortunately I remember this album because, you know, it's out there, but I love Freddie Gibbs. He's a rap artist. And the album wasn't really all that good. I'm not sure if y'all are fans of Freddie Gibbs, but what stood out to me about this particular artist piece, one, he, you know, clearly, you know, kind of copied the miseducation of Lauryn Hill's art. But what stood out for me was, and this connects me back to how I defined or began to, at a young age, define trust. The art on his album cover, on the right, you can see some symbols there that for me kind of triggered me a little bit, because I grew up navigating that particular art. Being from the South Side of Chicago, that art is actually gang affiliated, right? So you see the 6-point star, you see the pitchforks. Those are things that as a young kid, I was taught early to be cognizant of, because who I was around, I needed to know where I needed to go. Hence my cautiousness when it came to how I began to trust people, how I was able to really be open and vulnerable, and begin to assess what types of relationships I could have with people. Because if I made the wrong choice, if I put the wrong currency in the wrong relationships, it could literally cost me my life. So I had to really think about how I put myself in situations where I could be authentic while also remaining safe, remaining in a place where I could be supported and be authentic while also adhering to kind of our social standards and stuff. So I threw that one out there, you know, Olin and I, because we wanted to kind of open this up for where trust was originated and how we began to make meaning of trust at early ages, and how's it playing out and how we present ourselves in our professional spaces. Olin, did you have any reflections?
No, I think that you know, sets it up very well. You know, thinking about how I grew up in urban Chicago, in a Black neighborhood, and thinking about my mom growing up in Mississippi, actually picking cottons, and grew up in the days of Jim Crow, and how that impacts how my mother trusted, and in turn how she instilled in me trust, or distrust, however you want to look at that. And then in turn, kind of moving into college, where notions of trust were challenged, because I realized that some of the greatest things I learned about trust as I started is that trust was not defined to just one group of people. I learned that sometimes that people who look like me are not necessarily my friend. People that don't look like me are not necessarily my enemy. You know, think about how that plays in trust, and then now getting into working at predominantly white institutions and how that challenges and changes and firms my notion of trust. So just thinking about all of those different environments. So we really want you to kind of think about and kind of share back. Think about how trust has manifested itself for you. And then in turn, in what ways has trust been challenged for you? Like, you thought you learned one thing about trust, and then you got into an environment and said, you know what? Trust is very different than I learned it. Right. How about for you all?
a lot of things that came to my mind as you all have been talking has been some recent struggles that I've had at my institution, where in moving from my entry level role to my mid-level management role, and seeing that, okay, I see students in pain, I see colleagues in pain, I see all these individuals suffering due to things going on here. We need to address these. We need to make statements on these. We need to do something, and to have have mentors and supervisors say, well, Johnny, at this role, you need to learn that that's not the way this works. We have to go through processes. We have to run our messaging by people to get it, cleaned up. We need to do all these things. And for me, it's been a struggle this summer, because it was a absolute breach of the trust I thought I had in my institution and my profession, because I felt like we were letting people down, and I still do. And it's something that I've struggled to make sense of, to this day.
Johnny, you mentioned something very important, and this is something that Curtis and I actually talked about even last night into this morning. The transition from entry level to mid-level brings with it a change of perspective. And sometimes we have equated trust to where we are in understanding what our vantage point and perspective is. Yes. But sometimes moving to that next level or moving to a different position gives you a vantage point that is different, and it exposes you to different things, more information, different information. And so it can sometimes challenge what we know and have believed to be true, and what we know and believe to be what is out there. And so that's something here that I think is important to understand and appreciate. Sometimes with trust, we don't always have all the information we need, but we have the information we don't need in order to make things happen. So that's a really important point.
And I think as we move further into the presentation, and folks, if you still have comments, feel free to share. I just wanted to kind of throw this out there. We're going to talk a lot about the fact that as we transition, whether it's in work or even in our personal lives, we need to be constantly thinking about how we are reassessing regularly our trusting relationships, because the dynamics of how we function continue to change, right? So we can't stay with the same mindset and the same expectations as we go into different phases of our professional and personal careers. We have to have that regular conversation about, okay, so where are we with certain things, and how do I continue to be authentic in how I see things and how you're expecting me to function, even though how we function has totally shifted, right? I think it's important for us as we continue to grow. Yeah. Sorry, someone else is getting ready to say something. Sorry.
It wasn't me, but I'll jump in. The situation I had here at Westchester is a bunch of us all came to work in student affairs here at the same time. And, we were at relatively the same part in our career. We got to develop relationships with each other, and that all went well for a long period of time. And then more recently, there's been a lot of turnover for a variety of reasons. People have retired, some people moved on, change in overall leadership. And it really has made me take a step back and say, okay, I can't rely / trust on all these new people that have come in necessarily, because I haven't had a chance to build any kind of relationship with them. And not a big surprise for any of you who know me, I'm getting towards the end of my career. And so, how much energy and time do I want to invest in developing, close, trusting relationships with these folks, or does it end up being just a little more superficial, do the business that needs to get done, and everybody just kind of goes on their own way. So it's a lot of this change has happened in the past 4 or 5 years, so it really has been a different environment here for me than it was for quite a while. So.
I think there's a lot that needs to be said about trust, both up and down.
Yes.
So thinking about, and just bringing it back to my most recent situation, like I didn't trust up above, but I also didn't trust down below, which meant that I was doing a lot of things internally. I felt like I could only trust myself. And so that was really hard to figure out, like, what is it above me that I can trust, and what do they trust about me? And same going down. So kind of finding ways to express that distrust in a way that allows folks to be answered, to have folks be able to answer and say, this is why for me to be able to say, this is why I don't trust you, and be able to give people space to reassess and come to that trust, if that's something that they're going to be able to do, and if they're not, knowing that they're not going to be able to do that, and how are you going to make changes to gain that trust or move on.
That's right.
I think there's also something to be said for, is it not trusting people and individuals, or not trusting a process anymore?
Right.
And then people get looped into not trusting the process.
And we sometimes confuse the two, Amy. Like sometimes the issue is the process itself, and we have to figure out the steps. And because we are not maybe transparent, or not, people don't feel like they have enough information, or for whatever reason, that turns into, I don't trust the process, and so I don't trust the person that manages the process. And so the reality of the matter is, it may be very different. And there may be a number of things behind the scenes that people may be able to say about the process, or may not be able to say about the process, that contributes to that. Absolutely.
And because sometimes, well, quite often, honestly, there's a lack of transparency or connection, we tie the thing that probably we need to be focusing on with the person who has the ability to give us at least some sort of understanding or direction with where we're going, right? So we tend to marry the two when they're two separate things. So absolutely, that's a great point.
Yeah. Why don't we take the step to move forward here, and then as we navigate, if we want to ask additional questions or add to discussion, we can. We want to spend some time really talking a little bit about how trust is defined. Now, there is Webster's definition of trust, and then there is how trust is actually working out in all of our places, because it's all different. But one of the things we spend time looking at is, how is trust really defined dictionary-wise? And really, trust is defined really one of three ways. As a noun, about belief, and you see some of the definitions that are here on the screen. Reliance on the strength, ability, surety of a personality, and confidence. A confident expectation of something, hope. Confidence in the certainty that you're going to get future payment for property. So like, you're clear, we have faith, hope. There's also the concept of trust as a law, or the idea that a trust being the financial sense. It's kind of a bank. You put your chits in. As you gain trust, you get your chits. You get your chips, you put them in. As you expend trust, you lose, you take those chips out. As credibility or trust gets hit or lost, it may lose it, and you may gain that faster than you lose it. And so building trust is extremely important in that context. And then there's the context of trust as an active choice. The verb, to choose to trust someone, to rely on and think about and place confidence in someone or something, to have confidence, right? So we're thinking about this in terms to the belief, the actual setting up of one, but also the active choice verb to trust someone or not to trust someone, or to diminish that trust. When you think about the definitions of trust, what comes to mind for you? What thoughts come to mind? What opinions come to mind? What's there?
I would say vulnerability. Vulnerability comes to me, and maybe it's a definition, or maybe it's more of a companion word or feeling. I think you trust people, and you feel comfortable being vulnerable. Yeah, that's it. That's all.
Absolutely.
That's a good one.
One of the things that comes to mind for me is intention. So like having good intentions. or having bad intentions and the implications that that can have as a foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Intentionality, for sure.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's why am I giving the opportunity for the trust?
Yeah.
Mm. Talk more about that.
So for me, I see it as, am I giving the opportunity for someone, and these are just two, but am I giving the opportunity for someone to succeed or fail? And on top of that, what else am I giving the opportunity for? Because in trust, in personal relationships, as well as in professional relationships, there's multiple reasons that we give trust. Sometimes that we allow trust to occur, whereas other times we don't. Sometimes it's from a directive, sometimes it's from our own inclination. Other times it's from the possibility of hope. Yeah, I feel like there's so many more that are just escaping my mind right now.
Good. Other thoughts?
For me, I think similar to like that first definition, to like act in good faith. So like for a supervisor, even if there's restrictions, to like still act in good faith, like to support me and try to advocate for me on my behalf. If it's, I have trust in my own parents, it's for them to take care of me, like care about me, and your own children, like for them to just be honest with what's going on. So I think it's really just to have that faith that you're acting with the best intentions, being honest, and doing the best that you can with the parameters that you have.
You know, what's resonating with me is from William's point, and then also Kimberly, I think that, and Olin, I don't think we talked about this, but the notion, the need for trust to be reciprocal, right? So we're willing to be trusted, but we also want to, at some point, trust the folks who, you know, we may work with or work for, and putting some focus on that relationship and where the pieces of trust need to be, you know, equal, I think is just as important. And how do we navigate that? How do we really force dialogue about where those Kool-Aid points, if you will, when it comes to trust actually exist?
I agree with that, but let me also take the devil's advocate approach. I think there are actually times when, we invite everybody else to chime in. I think there are times when trust may not be able to be reciprocal.
Correct.
Let me give you an example. Basic example. Everybody every day walks somewhere to get to work, to home, etc., right? And every day you pass by somebody on the street, right? You pass by someone on the street, sometimes you say hello, sometimes you don't, right? I argue there's a trust relationship there. There's a certain amount of trust that you give walking by the street that somebody is not gonna harm you, or somebody say hello, or at least a level of respect there that happens, right? And so my reaction to that is sometimes we give more trust, in those kinds of situations where we don't know a situation than being in a situation where we do know it. And so trust is not always simple. Sometimes trust has to be given on faith. And trust is faith. That's a real hard thing to do right now in COVID.
Right.
It's a real hard thing to do. I think we all know it's a real hard thing to do, right? Because of the fact that there is so much ambiguity and uncertainty going on, and there's no established playbook for COVID. So everyone's like, well, why is this happening? Why does this need to happen? There are more questions happening. I need to know more to feel comfortable, psychologically, not just physically safe, but psychologically safe, so I can trust. So trust is not always difficult, but it's hard to do that right now. How is this showing up right now? Let me back up for a moment. We talk about this. So what you see on the screen here are a series of synonyms and antonyms that, well, really a lot of synonyms that came up for us talking about trust, right? And so this is what was there: confidence, expectation, hope, certitude or certainty, store, right? Let me just do a basic question right now. And Curtis, you can work with this. As you think about where your organizations are right now, back up. Before I give that question, I actually want to turn to Charlotte. Charlotte, may I put you on the spot for a moment?
Yeah.
Yes.
You just put something in the chat I think we need to talk about. So would you be willing to share and expand upon what you've talked about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that whether it be like our personal identity, whether it be our identities, right, or like our just past experiences with people shape how we see trust, right? So when I heard your prompt around what's the first thing you think, I thought like, well, what are the receipts, right? Like, what have you done? How have you proven yourself to be trustworthy, right? And the language on that. But also, what has been my experience to see that what you say you're going to do or not do is actually happens.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we make decisions about if someone is trustworthy even before actually having those interactions with them, which I think some of the identity politics play into that. And then some of it are just or how we are wired or the experiences that we had.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Right on. That's a good segue, Curtis, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Yeah. Let's all right. So our whole premise here, and Curtis, jump in. Our whole premise, based on where we are at this moment, is we kind of need to re-educate ourselves around what trust actually is, how it shows up, what we need to do. We've had some ways that trust has manifested itself in time, over time. There are things that have happened and experiences that have happened in our lives that have challenged trust, and right now also challenges that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to spend some time kind of re-educating ourselves. So let's think about this right now. How is trust showing up right now for ourselves and our organizations? How is it showing up the way it's intended? And if it's not showing up the way it's intended, why not? What's been the challenge?
Well, and I think the thing that, so our institution is a small private institution. We lost our president and provost over the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Finances at the institution are tenuous at best. And so William's comment earlier really resonated with me that trust, I think right now I'm equating trust with hope. I have to believe that the person that they've brought in as the interim president and what they are doing, which are massive cuts, is going to help this institution, be here in 10, 20, 30 years. But your question is helping me reframe that is a blind trust. I have no action in that. I'm trusting that they will do it and they're going to fix it. And it's a blind hope and a blind trust. And I'm not sure exactly where I think I'm almost there about switching where that's going to fall to be more that I take more of an ownership role in that experience and be more engaged in that trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's being very aware of, kind of like what Charlotte was referring to, where those receipts lie. Like, we got to know what that history was, and then us become very present in where we're at now, knowing that we're navigating a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things that are just outside of our control. How do we assess our ability to trust and have faith and be able to hope and have, a firm belief that folks are trying to do what's best for everyone with very tough decisions that are currently and probably will continue to happen as we move forward. That's a lot, knowing that we still are trying to let go of and manage how we felt with certain things that may have happened previously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So another question that we threw out there for folks to really think about is, and I think Amy had a great perspective to kind of get the conversation going. The second question was, what are some of those interpersonal, socio-cultural dynamics that exist within this construction of trust? So we talk about, right now, COVID is hitting us hard and is forcing us within our field to really rethink a lot of how we do things, how we acknowledge things, how we have to reconcile our work, right? So what are some of those components that we have to acknowledge that truly challenges how we think about trust and how we, again, reshape how we, lean into and engage with the notion of trust?
I think from my perspective, going off of that, Curtis, is what are we doing to give feedback or an understanding on the other individual or the other people? So with Olin, you stated about the passing by individuals when you go to work and all those things. There really isn't the opportunity to give feedback during that time, maybe sometimes. But what about when we are having the opportunity to give feedback? Are we giving it? And are we giving it constructively? How are we giving feedback? Really, that is really where it's at to me personally, seeing how to help correct and influence other individuals and really the future.
Yeah.
Because without that feedback, essentially you're still turning the same wheels. You don't switch anything out. You're just running the same machine. And it allows those individuals to then take in that feedback, whether wanted or not, and allows them to see from our perspective what we think. Allows them to conceptualize and internalize what was just given to them. And I know for me, I don't like that feedback. I don't, but it's needed. It really is. It allows me to see what I haven't seen and what I can see. I don't have eyes really in the back of my head. I don't have the external force telling me, that was a great decision or that was a bad decision. Kind of find out through, chance or fumbling. And given that constructive feedback in certain situations allows it.
I want to take your comment and Johnny's comment and combine it as well. Feedback important, but also how do we give people an opportunity to see the landscape and provide perspective on the total landscape we are being a part of, that we're a part of? And in turn, how do we also give people the ability and the cues to be able to evaluate what you tell them versus their meaning and understanding of what the landscape actually is? And how do we create some connection for folks there? In terms of thinking about that, in terms of if you have some certainty and some clarity about what you're looking at and about what you get, maybe that can help create a bigger understanding of trust between folks.
And I think it gets to that notion of vulnerability that was talking
Absolutely.
about.
Vulnerability, honesty, and transparency, all three together.
Yes.
Right here in that comment.
Yes. If some of those pieces are missing with information being given, there's not going to be trust, or it'll be a very low level of trust because we've already kind of manipulated how we want someone to have information, how they can function, right? Especially during a tumultuous time, there's going to be a lot of fear. There's going to be a lot of confusion and all those type of things. So yeah, I think that vulnerability piece is key to allowing for those concepts to be able to marry a bit, and for folks to feel like they can actually lean into a situation, ask questions, get more information, and be a part of hopefully a solution versus just being a part of a process.
One thing that I was thinking of is, to me, it almost seems like there has to be two different, I don't want to say definitions of trust, but two ways of looking at trust. I mean, in an employment environment, you kind of get forced into the relationship with the people above you, and then in Colleen's example, the people below you, and that's one way of having to approach it and look at it. Whereas you can have a fairly different approach with colleagues if you're not forced into a direct relationship with them as a partnership that the institution is expecting you to follow up on or something like that. So you can approach it and navigate it and come to a conclusion much differently with colleagues than you can with a supervisory structure.
Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed. We should probably move forward, I guess. So let's talk a little bit about earning, gaining, and how you cash it in. I want to share, we talked about some personal ideas. I want to share kind of a personal experience related to the last conversation a little bit, but maybe gains into this conversation. We'll see how it works. It relies around the decision why I needed to leave the University of Maryland and move forward to another institution and a new challenge. I was sitting in my office with my supervisor one day. We were going through a one-to-one. And we were talking about the fact that the department had an associate director position that was open. I have made a couple of mistakes, small mistakes that have caused some issues. And sometimes mistakes are not an indication that you have messed up. They are an indication that you're stagnant and you need a new challenge. And I had made the mistakes, and I knew that I didn't think they were big deals. They were big deals. I asked my supervisor feedback about being ready for the associate director position. And at the time he said, we know what your strengths are. They're great. He said, your problem is you're having trouble seeing to what's important. When you're an associate director, you have to do that. You're a young professional, you need more time. For me in that moment, two things happened. On the one hand, I said, well, wait a minute. You understood from the beginning, I was working on that position and I was working on going into the position I was so I could be prepared to be an associate director, and you're telling me I'm not ready. And you knew one of the things that needed to happen is I wanted to get ready for this. So on the one hand, trust may have been eroded because I had faith that I was going to get prepared for that, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen the way I expected it to. And he woke me up in ways that challenged me that I don't know if he would ever get me ready for that position. But at the same time, I could trust that he would tell me if I was or was not ready. I could trust that I knew that he was going to move us in a different way to determine what was best for me. And then I had to make a decision trust-wise to say, that's not the way I want to move, or that's the way I want to move. And I had made the decision, that's not the way I want to move. I need to be at a place where will allow me to move in ways that will allow me to learn how to do the job. And so I had to go. That set me in a different direction. So it put me in a place where I put him in a different kind of trust place than I was before. And I don't know if I've explained it very well. But as you think about gaining, earning trust, and losing trust, how does that happen in your organization? How do you gain trust in your organization? How do you gain power and influence in your organization? What have you learned about how that happens?
That's a great example.
Olin, I think you talked about earlier on in the presentation about, vulnerability, or maybe I'm blending conversations together.
Yeah.
But I remember a conversation with a former supervisor that I had at one point about, it was all regarding pay and promotions. Seems like that's a trend. I'm a big believer on do what you say you're going to do. And if there's something that comes along that prevents you from doing it, you should say that as well. We don't work in a world where we know that everybody has magic wand. It's like, I'm going to work on this for you. And then you come around a month or two later, it's like, you know what? I've hit a hurdle. Here's what's going on. I'm still pressing forward, but you gave me an update. But I think people make promises and then they either don't follow up or they don't communicate why they can't deliver. And I think that, is an immediate trust breaker for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I would have to agree. Sorry, you can't see my whole face, but I think I came into a new position at the university that I had went to as an undergrad. So, and my supervisor was new to the university. And so I felt like I knew a lot about the university. And so it was hard because I felt like trust was not like, it was assumed that it was there instead of kind of earned. And then out of respect, I gave it to my supervisor. And then as time went on, those empty promises and things like that continued. And I feel like through the lack of action, I learned a lot. I think that would be the best way to say it.
Absolutely.
For me, I think honesty plays a huge piece in this, and I think some folks have has hit this point as well as Olin's initial example. But I've had experiences at my previous institution where my supervisors were holding pieces back, and then I got slammed halfway through the semester with feedback that apparently had been piling up, even though we were meeting regularly, and they didn't want to hurt my feelings. And I'm like, well, now what? Now that we're in this spot, so thanks, because now you've just ruined the rest of the semester for me, and now I have to find a new job. But I think honesty, I think the transparency, and for me, vulnerability is huge. And I think that in my mind is the biggest way to build trust. I'm relatively new to my senior housing officer role, and taking over a senior housing officer role and right before a pandemic, not super fun. Not that any of our jobs are super fun, but trying to navigate being that kind of leader for a department. I've been very honest with my staff, and I think we've built a level of trust that we haven't had in the past. Not to say that I didn't have great relationships with my team, because I did, but I think now, like, letting them know, like, hey, I have no effing clue what's happening next either, and I'm just as terrified as you are about what all this means. I think that honesty and vulnerability really helps.
I think admitting that you don't know is part of trusting too, especially in the pandemic that we're living in. Just admitting that you're also in the same exact situation of unknown alone as a supervisor is just puts everyone at ease. It puts you all at a level that is equal of humanity, instead of you're my supervisor, I'm your supervisor. But we all don't know. Even the head and over people don't even know what's going on. I mean, politicians don't even know. And everything, there's just so much unknown.
I agree. I think for me, while I'm entry level, so I supervise an RA staff only, I try my best as a supervisor to be as transparent and as vulnerable as possible with them, so that they understand where I'm at, why the decisions are being made, and things of that nature. I think the hiccup for me is I don't get that same respect from my supervisor. Right. So it's frustrating. And where usually I kind of go in with an open mindset to new positions. Unfortunately, I've been here for 2 years, and there's little to no trust in my supervisor about things. So they could say something, and unfortunately, sure, okay. And it's not until it happens that I'm like, okay, cool. But unfortunately, the trust has been already broken. So it's, for me, it's like at this point, if you do what you say, great. And if you don't, I didn't expect it anyway. So, and that's unfortunate for me, because I am I'm the bridger. So I have to do a lot of explaining to my staff about why things didn't go the way that, the way they were supposed to go, or they were intended to go. And I get, as the middleman, you get the crap from the top and you get crap from below. So I'm dealing with that. But I think that the benefit is that because I have a coworker now, I'm able to kind of share my frustrations with her. And we kind of able to navigate through that. But unfortunately, neither one of us trusts our supervisor. So we're in this situation where I try to respect the chain of command, so not going over their head, but how much can this go on? Like, how long do I respect the chain of command if you're not going to deliver? Or when you talk about delivering, it is very much, okay, I take everything that you say with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my opinion, you lied.
Oh, mm-hmm. Yep. Wow. Absolutely.
So I know for me, Chantel, I can definitely say I agree. That chain of command piece, it really does matter. So I graduated about 2 years ago from undergrad, took a year off, and I was in security, and it was horrible for me personally. I am very much like, I care about people. I love my job. I loved everything I did, but people just were not there. I was overseeing 500 to 800 people as one person, and I had 45 supervisors below me. I had to fire most of them, and then I had to fire so many other people. And then with the constant turnover, and then the vice presidents and the presidents of our region just constantly pushing on me, at one point I was like, listen, I don't know what else I can do. Like, I'm overseeing all these sites. I have to, be up almost 18 hours a day for work nonstop, because Zoom, you don't have to leave. You don't have to go to places. So you're on the computer 18 hours sometimes. And then coming into university, I was like, wow, this is so much better. But you start to see the things where, yeah, you did change from one job to another. But it's very much, you're starting to see some of the things are just overlapping very quickly. You're like, wait a minute, no, I thought I left that. Wait, why is that here? What's going on? And you just start to see things pile up, and the honesty and the dishonesty is starting to show very quickly, especially during the pandemic, because then you really get to see where people are truthful and how quick they are to respond to things. Is this going to get done today, or are we going to put off hiring a diversity officer or someone to actually take on these challenges? Are we going to do it after the pandemic, or are we never going to do it? I don't know. But quite frankly, it seems to be put on the back burner, or not even on the stove.
One of the things I found myself doing in both your situation and Chantel's situation is, if you redefine trust in terms of certainty, I trust that I know this person won't do X, Y, Z, or I trust that I know how this person's going to operate. So I'm going to respond in a different way based on how that person's going to operate. Really about learning kind of the personalities of folks and understanding exactly how people go. And it has been, it's been an amazing asset for me in understanding how things work and how we can get things done, to be able to reframe in that way.
I think the managing up piece, Olin, is huge.
Yes.
Not only for the outcomes that you're expecting to get done, whether you have control of them or not, but then also for self-care. I think when you start thinking about how you can control the things that are in your plate, and then be able to, at some point, let go of what you can't control and put it where it's supposed to be, you're giving yourself the ability to breathe and put the responsibility where it needs to be. It also gives you, again, the opportunity to assess what's next, because you can only do that for so long, because it's a circle, right? Like, it's coming back at some point. The question is, how hard will it hit this time? So how are you growing from that particular experience, so what's next for you, whether it's in that space or in that next opportunity? Now, we know right now it's tough to think about next opportunities, but it's never too enough to be thinking about how you're preparing mentally, physically, emotionally about that transition, knowing that that trust piece may be fractured, and it may remain fractured based off of how folks function.
We are at 3:52, and I think there are so many other things we wanted to get to. Charlotte makes a very good point in the chat about it being difficult for folks to hold multiple truths when they seem conflicting.
Yeah.
and it does include folks' expectations. And, as we kind of think about this, we really want to kind of leave you and think about, we would have talked about this. I think we want to leave in terms of really two different questions and a couple of takeaways. One is, are we truly, when it comes to trust, are we truly aligned in ways that allow us to trust our leaders and invest in our organization? That's not just the organization itself, but that's, are we aligned with that too? How do we do the work to determine how we assess that for ourselves, navigate that for ourselves, and really work with that? And then second, how do we give ourselves permission and ability to really define and develop a relationship that is genuinely a trustworthy relationship? How do we give ourselves the ability to do that? And how do we do that when trust has been broken? And really think about those two questions. I think it's really important for us to think about that in the concept, not just about individual trust relationships, but also our organizational relationships as well. We'd leave you with a couple takeaways. I hope this has been amazing conversation.
I wish we had an extended session for
Me
this.
too. I wish we had another 50 minutes to do this, at least. But we learn from what is and isn't trust for ourselves. It shows up and is demonstrated within our organizations through our professions. Both personal values and expectations, as well as organizational values and expectations, feed into our definitions and understanding of trust. All that has to kind of be aligned together for reliability, honesty, vulnerability, transparency. And I want us to reflect on the idea, or we should reflect upon the idea, we have to learn the meaning and impact of trust before we can really place value in trusting situations. And this, when we say, it's not that we don't understand it, but it's a recognition that there has to be sometimes a renegotiation of this. And sometimes it's a constant renegotiation of this as you navigate the workplace environment and even our personal relationships every day.
We should become comfortable reassessing trust throughout our lives. Like, if we wait too long, we become stagnant, and we move into a place where if any little thing happens, it's in conflict. And it's not only from a job standpoint or whatever, that's one piece, but it's in conflict with our soul. Like we're naturally not supposed to be functioning in conflict when it comes to trusting people, but we have to acknowledge that and work through it, so that way we put ourselves in the best place to be our most authentic selves.
Any last comments before we close?
I've been saying this, in different circles, and you might hear it again tomorrow if you're on a session that I'll be a part of. I think the pandemic has provided us, I think this conversation is so challenging and interesting right now because, when you stress relationships, whether they're employer to employee or peer to peer or leader to follower, those stress points really kind of pull people off of pedestals and out of little hidey hole positions and really kind of show you how they think and what they care about and how they feel, how they treat information, how they value your time and your resources. And I think a lot of us are feeling kind of funky about trust right now because I think some of us have seen some things in people that we expected to be able to trust or hoped we could trust or were trusting, or even whole institutions that we were trusting that kind of let us down. And that's not just at work, that's the government, that's your city, that's your community, that's the people down the street. And I think that it's all kind of coming together all at the same time that I don't know who I should trust anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Real talk.
Real talk right there. Absolutely. But one of the things we're going to end up having to try to figure out doing part of the conversation here is we are probably going to have to figure out how to redefine trust in those situations, because when we get through this and come out the other side, yes, we may not look at people the same again, but we have to figure out how to move forward both within and after that. So that's part of this. This almost kind of proves the title of Miseducation by itself, because the reality is we have operated one way, and now people have been forced to make different decisions, and we have had to deal with the perceptions of those changes. And now we have to figure out how to move forward beyond it.
Knowing that many of our organizations systemically have changed, will have gone through significant change. We're going to see leadership change. Many organizations are reshaping itself to modify so that way it can exist. So that concept is going to have to go through a refurbishing itself, because we won't be the same as how we started pre-COVID.
Yeah. We're going to leave it there because we way over time.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
We appreciate y'all. It's good to see y'all. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, y'all.
Guys. Yes,
Yep.
Amy. Yes.
Amy, on point.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
On point.
That was a gem. Yes.
Thank you, Olin and Curtis.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank y'all.